Hi there, and I'm putting together this screencast as a accompaniment to the latest Art of Procurement episode. It's Art of Procurement episode 49, and it's talking about how we need to think differently and elevate the role of procurement through using strategic governance. Now, for the show itself, which is actually just a more of a summary of the presentation and some show notes and actually links to download the slides as well from the presentation, you can go to artofprocurement.com/governance. That's artofprocurement.com/governance. Okay, then, for some context, is that I was asked recently by an organization to speak at a gathering they have. It's a conference, an internal conference every year that brings together procurement leaders from all the way across their country. They come together to meet in a conference, and I was asked to speak on the topic of governance. Now, before I go into that, if you don't know me, if you're new to the Art of Procurement, then I've really worked across the majority of the procurement value chain. I've been fortunate enough to work in multiple industries and countries, and as a practitioner, as a service provider, and in direct and indirect services as well. I'm the host of the Art of Procurement podcast, something that I started back in November. And if you're coming to the site here, then you more than likely know about the Art of Procurement and really the role that I'm trying to help take the podcast and elevating procurement, elevating the procurement profession and the value that we're able to drive within our organizations, particularly in these times of change, times where I think that procurement is subject to significant change. All right, so going into the topic itself that I was asked to talk about, which was governance, procurement governance. And what does procurement governance actually mean? And I asked some of the listeners of the Art of Procurement show, and responses I got back varied from checking the box exercise, really having meetings for the sake of having meetings, and unfortunately, a lot of it was saying it's a waste of time. Here's my favorite. It's a great time to hit the mute button and surf the internet. And I think we've all probably been there where we've had organizational or supplier governance calls that really haven't done anything for us, and we've been calling in remotely. It's a good time to hit that mute button. But really, what most of the responses were around the fact that we focus on control, on compliance, on discipline. We look at governance as a way of really restricting people doing what they want to do within our organization. It has negative connotations. And I think that as we're moving to an era where buyers, or people who buy services within our organization, not procurement, but end users, they're used to going home and clicking, one-click Amazon purchase. They want to bring that to the way that they buy when they're at work. And I think that the more that we put in place restraints and controls that feel like we're restricting them in doing what they want to do, then the more of a negative kind of connotation that our business users and our end users have with procurement. Is it working? Well, what do others think of us? And this is an interesting question. I want to go back to a survey that one of my previous clients actually ran, and they reached out to CEOs, CFOs, founders, presidents of companies across their client base, and also companies that were just in the industry that they serve. And they asked the question, does procurement add any value that drops to the bottom line? And it was really surprising, the response that they got back, and that was that 58% of those CEOs actually questioned if procurement does add any value that drops to the bottom line. And, pretty startling number, really, that almost 2/3 really wonder what it is that we do to help them in the first place. Some of the comments that were received back in that survey were, and this is in follow-up interviews, so they did follow-up interviews with some of the respondents. They said that their procurement teams were tactical and not strategic. And that was a common theme. So that we're great at process, but we're not very good at driving the business forward. And when we do report savings, then the businesses are reporting that they're not actually seeing those savings drop to the bottom line. Perhaps it's because we're not really considering total cost. We're implementing or attempting to implement sourcing agreements that aren't what the business wants, so they're not going to use it. It could be what I call procurement math. So it's savings that we claim that just don't mesh with the reality. Maybe that we're projecting based on false volumes or whatever it may be. But our leaders are really questioning the validity of what we claim we're actually achieving. And how about CPOs themselves? What do CPOs think? And back in, I think it was episode 30 of The Art of Procurement, at artofprocurement.com/Deloitte, I talked with Brian Umbenhauer. And Brian is the global head of sourcing and procurement at Deloitte Consulting, and is the co-author of their CPO survey. And in this year's 2016 CPO survey, Brian reported that almost 70% of CPOs have mixed views on the effectiveness of their procurement function as strategic business partners. So again, think of that. If nearly 70% of CPOs wonder how effective they are in being strategic business partners, what hope is there for the people that we're trying to influence? What do they think if we don't think that we're being strategic business partners? It's really a wake-up call, I think, when you look at those two things. And that was really what spurred me to thinking about how we really need to think differently, and how governance should really be enabling us to become trusted business partners, not being policemen, not being people who are trying to restrict people in the organization. And how do we do that? Well, it's really through alignment. This, to me, is what strategic procurement governance is all about. It's aligning ourselves with our organization, with the leaders within our organization, with the stakeholders within our organization. It's aligning ourselves with the vision of the company, with major initiatives that are taking place, with the long-term plans of the CEO and the board of directors, and also with our stakeholders, with the objectives that our stakeholders have. And here's a quote from Gerard Chick, and this was back in episode 22 of The Art of Procurement. Gerard is the Chief Knowledge Officer at Optimum Procurement, and he said that if procurement does its job properly, it makes the rest of the organization work smoothly because we're aligned. And I want to build on that with one more quote. And this is something that a former manager of mine said when I spoke to him at a recent conference back in November of last year. And he made this comment that really struck with me. And that's that procurement's in the business of helping our stakeholders win. That really, that's why we're here. We're here to help them do whatever they need to do that helps them play into the goals of the organization, that helps them move the organization forward. And the difficulty is that that's subjective. And so to be able to help our stakeholders do that, we need to do it in a way where the rest of the organization, the people who are paying our bills, recognize how we're contributing to our stakeholders and helping our stakeholders win. Because often that's not the case, and that's where we get hung up because, we're measured on cost, and cost isn't necessarily aligning ourselves with what our stakeholders want. So when we're fully aligned, what does that look like? Well, it means that we have shared objectives. It means that we have the same goals with our stakeholders so that we're actually working together. We can be partners. We're not enemies right off the bat. It means that we're measured in the same way. And this is absolutely critical. It's something that I'm really passionate about is, there's no way for us to have alignment with our stakeholders if we have conflicting metrics. And, a couple of examples is I was talking to a guest on the show. She's actually going to be the guest on episode 50, which comes out next week, talking about the objectives within the legal department. And when we work with legal, a lawyer or a general counsel's objective may be to close a case as quickly as possible. And that may not be related specifically to the cost of the lawyers that are working on that case. As an example, you may actually incent lawyers, third-party lawyers that you engage with, and give them bonuses if they're able to close a case faster than somebody else, which might actually increase your total cost. If we're measured on cost savings, we're going to go to the firm who doesn't have the ability to close a case quickly, but they may charge lower fees, but the case lasts 12 months rather than 3 months and actually has a bunch of internal cost that isn't taken into account when you're making a decision. Another area is marketing. Marketing may be measured on a number of hand raises, so the number of people who are engaging with content that is being delivered by the marketing organization. But that's expensive, so it may be a higher total cost to deliver that content, which ultimately leads to a lower average cost per hand raise or cost per prospect or however they're engaging, but the total cost is higher. And how are we, again, to really be able to help the marketing organization achieve that if our objectives are different? The third area is having shared processes. And there's a couple of different things to think about here. One is building agility into our processes. So making it that it's not one size fits all. There's actually you're taking into account different circumstances so that you can flex the processes based on individual needs. The other way to think about it, and perhaps that isn't possible, perhaps you're in a regulated environment where consistency of process is absolutely critical. Well, if that's the case, make sure that you have a consultative process when you're actually building what those processes look like. And an example of that was on the episode with Chris Brown of the World Bank, when Chris was talking about the fact that the World Bank had 5,000 different constituents or stakeholders, and their reform process involved engaging all of those in the process so that they were bought in. So at least the output is something where everybody has kind of been involved in the process. It's something that's not just pushed from the center out into the business. And the final area that alignment looks like, well, it's shared governance. So it's making sure that you have joint accountability for the success of the program. And I'm going to talk about governance a little bit more. And there's really two sides of procurement governance. There's the strategic side and the operational side. I'm going to talk about the operational side a little bit later, but first strategic. And when you think of strategic governance, that's really ensuring that you're aligned with the goals of your company and the strategic direction of your company. I'm going to talk about this notion of a cross-functional steering team, because to me, that's where strategic governance begins. That's the key pillar to building a strategic governance program within your organization. I'm going to talk about what that group does, but first of all, I want to cover who should be on that team. And first of all, and I have to say, just go back that, you adjust this for scale depending on the size of your organization, whether you're a big company or a small company. But you need to have on this cross-functional steering team people who set corporate strategy, or at least their designates. So it's the CEO, the COO, the chief administrative officer, that can be the chief financial officer. It's somebody or more than one person at the very highest level of your company that sets that sets the corporate strategy. Next, and this is really important, and I think it's something that we often forget about, but it's those that pay the bills for procurement. Who signs our check? At the end of the day, whatever we think value looks like and whatever we think value we're delivering, it doesn't matter. The only people that are really the arbiters of ROI are those that pay the bill, those that pay our bill for procurement. And that can be a CFO or a controller in a model where those bills are paid centrally, but it could also be top stakeholders if the cost of procurement is actually spread out among the business. And the third type of people who need to be involved in this team, in this governance board, are the functional leaders that materially impact the execution of corporate strategy. And I do want to be clear on this. It doesn't necessarily mean just the people who spend the most money with suppliers. Now, if the goals of the company and the objectives of the company are to use procurement as a way to manage and reduce cost, then sure, that's going to be a big part of it. The functional leaders who spend the most money will be a big part of it. But you may be in a company such as Google, who we interviewed back in, I think it's episode 14, but it's artofprocurement.com/Google. Well, Google, yes, are concerned about cost and managing cost, but really the fundamental goal of procurement at Google is to help the organization grow and to help the organization maintain their competitive advantage in the businesses that are important to the company. And those stakeholders who are really involved in growth and in pushing new product innovation may look very different from a list of stakeholders who are responsible for managing or for spending the most money. So just think about that when you're thinking, who are those leaders who will really impact the execution of your corporate strategy. All right, and just for context, I just share this, and I talk about this chart a couple of times throughout the presentation. I called it a steering team. You can also call it an executive governance council, procurement governance council. But that really sits at the top of your strategic governance process. And you have a category council and an operating council that feed into it. Okay, so I talked about who should be on the team. Now I want to talk a little bit about what the team should do. And the first thing that it's really charged with doing is aligning the business and procurement strategies. So making sure that procurement and the business is focused on common goals. Also that the corporate board can manage where there's any conflict that may exist between stakeholders, procurement, or between different stakeholders. The next thing the team does is sets the organizational strategy for procurement itself and approves investment plans based on the evolving business needs. So this team is the team that holds the purse strings. The CPO, the head of procurement, is responsible for building the capability plans that will enable procurement to meet the goals of the business. But it's really up to the board to approve those. And that helps build accountability among a number of different benefits, but accountability is key there. Another thing this group does is creates those shared objectives and metrics between procurement and stakeholders. So I said before that you can't really have alignment if you have goals that are conflicting between procurement and the business. Well, this team is now charged with trying to bring some really alignment between what procurement goals are and what organizational goals are. Those may be different for each functional area, but I think it's super important that we think about our objectives in a shared way rather than having two different sets of approaches, which again really leads to conflict from the first time that you're talking with a business stakeholder or a functional area. The next area is really approving those key strategies, sourcing initiatives, and business processes. And what's important here is as you start to implement a team like this, and invariably you get success, which leads to greater demand than you have the ability to actually execute on. So one area that this team can work on is resource allocation. So looking at when there's conflict between stakeholders or functional areas and what they think is important, well, ultimately this group is the one that depends on where resources should be spent if you have a problem with constrained resources. The next thing the team does is compliance. It manages compliance. But I say there in the bullet point, compliance to strategies, initiatives, processes. Honestly, what I really mean is a level higher than that. And it's change management. This group is really driving the change and kind of leading by doing. So communicating with their organizations and actually sharing why procurement exists and how you can use procurement and why you should be using procurement. That's really what the role of this team is. Over and above, some of the nitty-gritty compliance that I talked about there. But at the end of the day, you do still need a policeman. So the team does act as an executive level, what I call an issue resolution committee. But really, this is you hope that by having the threat of this team weighing in on conflicts reduces the conflicts and makes it easier for them to be resolved at a lower level, so it doesn't actually come to this level. So now that we have the team in place and we kind of understand it, we need to bring some we need to formalize the process. And there's a couple of different ways that I've seen this being done successfully. The first thing is you need to put in place a governance council charter. This is a great way of actually formalizing the role of that group itself. And when you think about what should be on a charter, it's things like the purpose and the goals of the team, the responsibilities as a whole of the governance council, how often the team and the council should be meeting, who are the participants, and I think very importantly, who are they able to delegate their authorities to if participants in the council aren't able to meet or join every meeting. It's important really to list what the inputs and the outputs of the meetings in terms of expectations. So what do different participants need to bring to the table, and what does the minutes or the outputs of the meeting look like? The next thing that I've seen work really well, and I'm really an advocate of doing this. I've seen it used when I've managed a shared services team in India, as a practitioner leading procurement organization, and also as a service provider. It's a lot more common as a service provider. But it's really putting in place some formal statement of works and some KPIs with our primary business functions, the primary areas that we're working with. You can't do this with everybody, but this is the way that you can manage and govern your key relationships with key stakeholders. What does this do? Well, it sets shared expectations. So if you as procurement and your one of your stakeholders or stakeholder groups has signed up to a statement of work, then it means that everything's on paper and everyone has shared expectations. You have metrics that are agreed that roll up, and that may not be in terms of savings because they may change, but it could be things like turnaround times, things that are a little bit softer, but that at least again go back to everybody kind of being on the same page. It's a way of formalizing roles and responsibilities, because you find that oftentimes when things go wrong, procurement professionals and stakeholders often point fingers at each other, saying that they didn't know who was really responsible for what. Well, this is a great way of formalizing it. And another thing that you can do is really put in place a performance management program with your stakeholders. And, that's really just a fancy word of saying, have some governance, have some functional area governance, just to make sure that you're providing the level of services and getting the results that they need. What this does is it really ensures that your objectives are aligned both with your organization, because this reports up into the governance council, but also with stakeholder specific needs. So just one more thought on the team itself. When you look at who this team are, think of them as your investors, the people that have the money that can actually really help drive the growth of the procurement organization, or think of them as a board of directors. What I like about this is that it really, one of the difficulties that we have as procurement is when we have one boss, if it will. We report into one person. So the goals that we are tasked with achieving are often in line with the individual goals of that one person. So if it's a CFO, it may be around reducing cost. If it's a COO, it may be some procure to pay related metrics. When you have a governance board in place like this, then you're really able to drive towards meeting the corporate objectives rather than the objectives of a single person or a single organization that you report into. All right, so I bring it up this slide again, and it talks about the governance council again, and also how that fits in to a couple of different areas, the category council and an operating council. I'm going to talk a little bit about category council, not so much, but this is really the area where you are working with your specific stakeholders to build category strategies. It's a board that's really procurement people and functional people that set and approve category strategies, that are really recommending the prioritization of initiatives that roll up to that governance council, and then really bringing oversight to the execution of category strategies. I'm not going to go into it in any more detail than that, just to say that I do strongly believe that that's a part of the strategic governance as opposed to operational governance. Well, what about operational governance itself? And actually, I wasn't going to cover that much in the presentation. When you think about operational governance, it's making sure that you deliver on your day-to-day commitments. But then I talked a couple of weeks ago on one of the shows, and I forget the show number, but you can go back into the archive, and it was with Chris Sawchuk of the Hackett Group. And we were talking about how procurement can become a trusted advisor. And this comment from Chris really stood out to me. Chris said that consistently delivering on the basics is the most important way to become a trusted advisor. And that was based on the results of a Hackett Group study looking into CPO issues in 2016. So for everything that we want to do, we have to consistently deliver on the basics. And that's essentially what operational governance is. It's making sure that we are managing our day-to-day procurement teams and making sure that our performance is meeting our objectives. It's also looking at our organizational compliance, making sure that we're being more of that policeman, that our stakeholders are in line with policies and procedures. It's acting as a first line of issue escalation. But something as well that I think is important is that when you look at how the operating council and operating governance interacts with that strategic procurement governance council, a lot of the decisions around recommendations around the work that we do in procurement and the way that we should evolve and build our capabilities, they're really set by this procurement operating council and then put forward by the CPO to the governance council for approval. And then they're handed back down to the operating council to then execute upon those visions of that governance council. So quick recap of how this all fits together. You have the Exec or Procurement Governance Council at the top, which is aligning procurement with business strategies and helping to manage the prioritization, execution, and high-level complaints. And something that I didn't put there was the change management associated with the vision that the Procurement Governance Council sets. You have the Category Council, which is really a joint council with procurement and stakeholders, which is setting and managing the execution of category strategies. And then you have the Operating Council, who's responsible for the execution of day-to-day procurement activities and is recommending procurement strategies in terms of our capability development to the Governance Council. And I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the benefits of this model. First of all, it's helping to drive alignment between procurement, the C-suites, and business stakeholders. It's enabling those shared and transparent objectives which are critical for us to actually be able to be aligned with our business stakeholders and with our C-suite. Because there's shared buy-in, it's really driving accountability on all sides. And this is really critical. It's enabling our performance as a procurement organization to be measured based on how we're contributing to shared objectives, not based on the contribution to the needs of one particular person who we roll up into, or based on objectives which really aren't aligned with what the business needs from us. That governance board is providing active change management support. That's key. And also the board is involved in the development of our capabilities. So when the board and the people that are on that board, when you think back to the people who are engaged there, when they're involved in how we develop, then it means that we're developing in the way that they want us to and to build capabilities to execute on strategies that they want us to execute on. So again, it brings a lot more buy-in from very senior level executives within the company. The other thing the team does is it's prioritization of projects and initiatives. So you have conflict between the fact of whether, for example, project A or project B should take greater importance to the company. It's very difficult for you to be able to do that at a stakeholder level, but at a governance board level, that's where they really see the big picture of what's important, what we should as procurement be working on. It's that formal issue resolution process as well, which while we try and get away from, it's kind of the stick, and you hope that having that issue resolution process that bubbles up to this level means that it's actually not required. And compliance, you are reviewing at board level, and you hopefully that's 1 minute or 2 minutes of your meetings. Again, just the knowledge that compliance with policies and procedures is reviewed at this level means that it's easier to actually drive compliance within the business, so that's not actually something that takes up a great deal of time of this team. So finally, I want to go into the 7 different success factors which are really critical to a program like this being successful. The first one is deliver on the basics, like what Chris Sawchuk said. We need to focus on singles, doubles, and those are really the table stakes. If we're not able to deliver on the basics, then it means that whatever we can say that we can deliver, the value we say that we can bring from a procurement organization as we want to elevate our role, it's really going to fall on deaf ears. Second success factor is really you make sure that we have the right people around the table. We need to formalize that process, the governance process, and ensure that there's active participation. That's really critical because, a lot of times you build a governance program in place like this, and it starts well, and then after a while it just tails off. So it's really important to just keep an eye on to make sure that you continue to have active participation. The next success factor is that this doesn't have to be a big bang. You can start small, focus, and then grow from there. When you think about where to focus, you can look at your customer segmentation, and obviously it can be the stakeholders that have the biggest impact on the business, kind of the 80-20 rule. But another way to think about it is start with those functional leaders. When you look at bringing functional leaders into a program like this, think of the ones that are already advocates of procurement function. They're friendly to the procurement function because, it's better to make your mistakes and kind of build out something like this from trial and error, working with people who understand where you're trying to get to rather than those who already have a dim view of procurement in the first place. You're not going to influence people by making mistakes on this. You want to work with people who are already friendly and understand the procurement value proposition. The fourth critical success factor is be patient. Look at there's no such thing as an overnight success, and it's really important that to have the involvement and that participation of the board, because it's going to be easy to kind of waver away from this after a month or 2 months or 3 months or a couple of weeks or whatever it is, where you're not seeing immediate results, because it just takes time. So the governance board needs to be strong to make sure that the organization stays the course, because you will get the long-term benefits, and the benefits over the long term will certainly outweigh the short-term benefits of taking a different approach. But it's really hard. So you need to keep that in mind in that interim period between when you set out and when you actually start to see the benefits of the results over the long term. The next success factor is really think about improving incrementally. So don't try and build, something that's all singing, all dancing from day one. The fact that you're going to have wins, those are going to give you the ammunition to go back to the board for more investment. This is particularly key where the board is actually playing that active role in the investment of your team. A way to think about this is, build a capability roadmap with the board. Look at over 12, 24, 36 months. Where are you today in terms of a bunch of capability areas that are important to you? Where do you want to get to? And that gives you the roadmap of investment when you start to get more wins, and also gives the more idea of where the ROI is going to come from. The sixth success factor is really remember that it's all about the business, it's not about you. Every interaction is about genuinely wanting to solve the challenges of your business partners, your business stakeholders, helping them achieve their goals and not yours. If you go to them and you kind of say, these are my goals, how can you, business, help me achieve them? Then they're going to turn off as soon as you start talking to them. The good news is, if the board has been successful in aligning objectives, then this shouldn't even be an issue because you should both be aligned in terms of what you're trying to achieve. And the seventh success factor, make sure you maintain that feedback loop. Everything that we do here is an evolving process. So you need to continually understand the needs of your business and the stakeholders to be relevant. But also, I would really encourage proactively soliciting feedback and adjust as necessary. To make sure that you're on the same page as your stakeholders, particularly where people are coming into this with a negative view of procurement in the past. Transparency is key. So keeping that feedback loop open is really going to help you build credibility with your business. Okay, so to close, I just want to go back to that quote from earlier that really stood out and resonated with me. And that's that as a procurement function, the reason that we're here is that we're in the business of helping our stakeholders win. My perspective is by using a formal strategic governance program such as this that really helps align procurement with the needs of our business. This is what's going to set the foundation to drive the change that's necessary to really help ensure that we become relevant and to help elevate our role so that we're doing more than just being transactional or being an RFP shop. We're really doing the things that we can, that we know we can, to help drive our business forward in ways that they probably don't already know. All right, well, that summarizes the presentation that I delivered. As I said before, the short version of this, without some of the examples and without the critical success factors, is in the podcast at The Art of Procurement, and that's artofprocurement.com/governance. If you have any questions related to this, or the material, or the podcast, then please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I actually include my cell phone number there. You can also email me at the email address that's listed on the slide, or go to the contact form at artofprocurement.com/contact. All right, well, thank you very much for staying with me. I hope that this really resonates with you and that you see a path for building strategic governance into your procurement program as you look at ways to really bring alignment between procurement and your C-suite executives and your business stakeholders. So, with that being said, thanks for listening.